This is our 11th and last video in our series, How You Can Learn Any Language. Today we're going to talk about thinking in the language. Hi, my name is Rachèle DeMéo from Belle Terre Academy. So it's really bittersweet for me to think that this is the last video in our series. We've been going on for almost 3 months of talking about how you can pretty much learn any language by following those 10 steps, and now this 11th one that I'm going to provide. So if you haven't watched the other ones, you might want to go back, because I'm really guiding you step by step in how you can succeed in learning any language. So in this one, you really want to train your brain to think in the language that you are learning and maintaining so that you never lose it for a lifetime. So what I mean by that is naturally your brain's going to think in one of two languages, either A, in the language, your native language, or B, it might be in your native language, but it also may be in the country in which you live in. What I mean by that is that when you move into a new country, that's not necessarily a country that you grew up in, your brain, after a period of time, it takes a few years usually, your brain naturally starts thinking in the language of the country that speaks the language that you're living in, that you're currently living in. So unless you train your brain to think in a language that you're either keeping up with, which might be your native language, or that you're learning, then guess what? The language that you naturally think in is going to be in the language of the country that you reside. So there are things that you can do to truly train your brain to think in the language. And not only will you obviously really be learning the language, but you're going to find that you have way more fluency in that language. So the first thing is already to be aware of it. You have to be aware of, hey, I need to be thinking in possibly a different language than the language that in the country that I live in. Obviously, let's say you're learning French and you're going to France. If you're temporarily living there, if you're visiting and you're starting to think in French, great. But if you're there over a period of years, you start realizing, whoa, English being my native language, I'm kind of losing that because I've been here for so long. And I've seen that time and time again. So basically, if you're trying to learn a language, you're trying to maintain a language, you have to exercise your brain to be able to think of that language. So what are you thinking about? So first of all, it has to be a mental effort. It doesn't come naturally. Second thing you could do is possibly put a reminder on your phone 1 to several times a day, just like, don't forget to think in Arabic, for instance. And it's just telling your brain, oh yeah, so whatever I'm thinking about right now, let's try to do that in this language. So for me, to give you guys an example, you guys know that I grew up both speaking English and French, which is why I don't have an accent in either. I'm asked that constantly. But Italian's a language I learned later on in life. I learned as a teen, but I'm not fluent and I have an accent. So it is a mental exercise for me to have to think in Italian. And even if I've learned a lot of it, it still doesn't come naturally for me. Even if I do all the things that I tell you to do, it still sometimes is hard for me to think in Italian. So what I've had to do is mentally tell myself. So things like this, for instance, I am thinking about what I have going on for the day. I'm like, have a little mental checklist. Oh yeah, I have this appointment at this. I'm teaching this online class. Oh yeah, I'm connecting with my students at this time. So as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about it in Italian. And even when I provide resources in our private group for our students at Belle Terre Academy, even if I'm providing a lot of those resources in French or possibly in English, I'm trying to train my brain to think about these resources in Italian. I know that's kind of tricky, but I really try to think of my little schedule in Italian. I also do that with any to-do list. I'm like, okay, what I have to do outside of work today? How can I think of that in Italian? I'm like, okay, aspirapolvere. Oh, I have to vacuum. I have, whatever it is. So I'm thinking about it in Italian. The same applies with schedule, with a to-do list, but also with a shopping list. When I'm going shopping, it's tricky because often I'll write my shopping list in French because my husband's still learning French. So it's also for him if we go together or if he happens to go or if the kids go, whatever. But the thing is, obviously with an adult, but I mean, I try to think of the items that I'm writing in Italian. And then when I'm going grocery shopping, I'm trying to think, oh, tomato, pomodoro, you know, and then zucchini, zucchini, oh, that was an easy one, eggs, uove, etc. So I'm training myself. I'm walking through the aisles thinking in Italian. And then when I'm driving, I already have my GPS that's in Italian, thankfully, that helps, but I'm also trying to think in Italian of whatever I'm doing. And then, even if I'm having a conversation in another language than Italian, which is quite frequent, I'm mentally telling my brain like, hey, really think of these things in Italian. So if I'm thinking about a conversation I'm gonna have with a student, I'm connecting on Zoom with a student during office hours, whatever it is, even if I'm thinking about what probably would be said in English or in French, then I'm like, trying to tell myself in Italian, how would I say all these things? So it is really a mental exercise, and it's honestly just the little things. Like maybe you're working out and you're counting your reps in Italian. Like I'm using Italian as an example because that's a language that I'm constantly learning. I'm still like terrible at the subjunctive, but I'm also especially trying to maintain it. And that's really the key if you're learning a language. That's great if you're learning a language, but remember, learning a language is just part of it. The maintenance, maintaining the language so that you never lose it, is really what makes a difference. And so by training your brain to think in that language, that will be a key factor in not losing it. And I saw that with fluency, that's really, really helped me. So before, when I was teaching at a local college, I remember there was an Italian professor that we often happened to cross paths right in the middle of the campus because our classes were kind of at the same time. And before I started training my brain to think in Italian, when I would see him, I'd be like, Andrea, and then I'd be like all kind of frazzled because I wasn't prepared to be speaking Italian. I was thinking in English or in French. I kind of think in both if I let myself just think in the language, you know, I could choose. I kind of think in both. But with him, I've had to mentally, every time I knew I was going to see him, I was like, oh yeah, he's going to ask me about my day. I'm going to see how his newborn is doing. And we're going to have like a 5-10 minute conversation, very short. But if I'm not thinking already in Italian, I'm going to be frazzled and I'm going to be like, and not be able to really say what I want to say. And so to make it easier on me, he's probably going to revert to English, and that kind of defeats the whole practicing purpose. So it really is a mental exercise that you have to train your brain to think in that language with the little things. As I mentioned at first, it's kind of challenging because you won't naturally do it. But if you set reminders up, if you put like little post-its in places and you're just like, hey, think in French, for instance, you're learning French. I hope you are. Think in French, and you have these post-its, your brain is going to do it. And you have to ask, I don't know how to put this in any other way than really put it out there that you're like, hey, I want to start thinking in this language. You have to like almost demand it for it to come to you, and stay positive. Don't beat yourself up, but you can think in a different language. And even if it's not all throughout the day, obviously not through the entire day, I'm not thinking Italian. I'm clearly not necessarily thinking Italian as I'm doing this video. I'm thinking in English because I'm doing it for you guys. But I'm still mentally trying my best to think in that language and to do little things throughout the day where I'm thinking the language. And before bed, I already mentioned this in another video, but before bed, I always try to read like a Bible verse in Italian. And then as I'm falling asleep, I'm praying kind of like just in relaxed mode. I'm trying to think in Italian so that right before I go to bed, my brain has been thinking Italian, and hopefully I'll keep thinking Italian as I'm sleeping. So those little things should help you to think in any language that you're learning and maintaining for a lifetime. I have a new exciting video coming up, and you're not going to want to miss it.